Hello, friends. Today we have a rare guest. Today we have Leon Weinstein, an American writer, political scientist, journalist, and director. We will talk about events from long ago as well as current events because there is a lot to discuss. Hello, Leon.
Good afternoon, and this is just from today and yesterday. So much is happening that it already feels like things happened much earlier, back in '99.
Well, I want to talk to you. You were a witness to the Sobchak era. As many people say today, that pattern, that system of power that we see today, it was actually built in St. Petersburg, and it was kind of a small testing ground for what was later spread to the entire Russian Federation. And as I understand it, you know a lot about these people, and I always say that until you do an audit, you'll never understand how to move forward. Until we do an audit of how this all happened, yes, how it was even possible for such a person to come to power, I think it will be hard to understand, how he was created and how to get rid of him, so to speak. Well, in 1997, the prosecutor's office began investigating corruption in the St. Petersburg administration. There's this mythology, Leon, that says Sobchak was an honest, pure person, and Putin, came in as this evil KGB guy and deceived him. Well, apparently, as I understand it, they were both KGB agents, and in fact, they worked together as a team. Back then, in 1997, the investigation linked the charges against the construction company Renaissance to a number of decisions made by the city administration. But basically, Yuri Shutov wrote that not a single business in the city could be opened without permission, Putin's permission, and a bribe to him. Is that true?
For some reason it sometimes freezes, but in general I understood the question and I'll try to answer it. I ended up in Leningrad. It was still called Leningrad back then, in 1989. Where he is with his wife. Yes, something's wrong on your end, too.
No, I can hear you. Everything is fine with me.
Okay. So I ended up in '89, where through my wife I met the Sobchaks. I emphasize the Sobchaks because it was both Lyuda and Anatoly. I called him Anatoly Alexandrovich, but so to speak, we had quite warm, friendly relations. They visited us in Los Angeles together with Lyuda. Then I remember I used to send suitcases of muslin for their daughter for Ksyusha. Ksyusha was brought to our place in Rapino, where we had a dacha, to play with our younger daughter. Well, she was always the ringleader, a year older than our Christina, but they played together at that time and became friends. So on one hand, our relationship was friendly like that, but on the other hand, Anatoly Alexandrovich was interested in their connections to the West. Well, as someone who, in general, lived for many years, I left in '73 and 1973, and generally participated in some political movements and activities, both in Israel and the USA. And I think that I was the first such emigrant who came back, with some knowledge of that society that existed at that time and of what was in the West, so to speak. That's why many people both in Moscow and in St. Petersburg tried, so to speak, to get some knowledge out of me about that world, and I gladly shared it with them, and in this way I got to know all sorts of very interesting people, starting from, all sorts of Moscow leaders, all Russian ones, and also those from St. Petersburg. So at some point I used to come to St. Petersburg. My mother-in-law was there, so we would go there, and I always called Anatoly Alexandrovich, and he would say, come in. I want to introduce you to a new person there. I didn't really figure out to whom, so I came to the Lenzavet, or whatever it was called at that time, and from all the corridors he was there, saw me, came up, shook my hand and said, "Here, meet my new assistant, my new helper." I said, "What happened to the old one?" "Well, I'll tell you about it later. That was Yuri Shutov, who later wrote a bunch of books, including about me, and he was in prison. He had nothing else to do, so he wrote. Later he apologized. Well, it's true, but it doesn't matter. But at least I have, a book about me."
The book by Shutov was called Sobchakchi Serce.
And then the second one, Sobchakiada. So in both the first and the second, I have a whole chapter. That is, in both books, a chapter is dedicated to me. So he says, Here, let me introduce you. So instead of Yura, we have a new person from Volodya. Volodya, come here. This is Volodya. This is Leon. Meet him. I shook his hand. It was Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. And Sobchak says, I would like you to work together. There were some projects being planned. They wanted to invite me to be the chairman of the St. Petersburg Restoration Fund. So you'll be working with Volodya. Talk to him. I talked to Volodya for about 15 minutes and he didn't look me in the eye. I was at least a head taller than him. So he was looking at my left shoulder and using some slang, just showing off his skills. There's something like that. Well, let's say it's studied in all sorts of intelligence training. Well, neuro-linguistic programming, it's called NLP, and it was clearly at the level of the second or third lesson, and your humble servant used to teach this. So it was very amusing for me to watch this. Well, we talked, he explained to me who I was supposed to pay. I said that I wouldn't pay anyone. So he was very surprised by this because he thought that Putin, because Sobchak was actually bringing me to him specifically so that he could explain to me who I was supposed to pay. I turned around, went to Sobchak, and as they say, barged into his office. I was allowed to do that. I walked in and said, Anatoly Alexandrovich, that guy we just met, he's a KGB officer. Sobchak says, yeah, I know. I say, hold on a second, he's a KGB officer. He says, well, Leonchik, he called me Leonchik. Well, there are bad KGB officers and there are good ones. I say, from my point of view, there are no good KGB officers. I mean, they can be good, but for that, they need to pass on to the next world. Absolutely. So that was more or less the beginning of our falling out, because when I found out that Vladimir Vladimirovich, or as he was called behind his back, Mr. Moneybags, they called him that in the council. He always said, why are you wasting your time with nonsense here? You should be making money. That's it. Well, so to speak, he didn't make much of an impression. He probably came across as a very average KGB guy. And then, actually, when Sobchak promoted him from assistant to deputy, which is a completely different level, and put him in charge of external affairs, that's when things changed. That is, programs in theory, programs about money, programs about construction. They're related to Western companies. So to say I was already interested in this where, he came from, and I actually found out where. Well, the KGB, obviously, right? There was, the head of the 5th Directorate of the KGB of the Soviet Union, Bobkov, General Bobkov. Later, he became for some time the deputy head, I think, of the entire KGB. So while he was the head of the 5th Directorate, he came up with a program, I don't remember what he called it, but the basic idea was great. Sort of to unite in the KGB, the bureaucracy and the criminals. And so to speak, either it just happened to coincide that Putin started doing the same thing, or maybe it was ordered from above, or maybe something else. But in any case, so to speak, they did it very, very successfully. That is, the KGB dealt with things in their own ways, and the criminals dealt with things in their own initial ways. And the officials, being afraid of all this, did everything they were told to do, because, so to speak, whether officially or unofficially, for this, of course, you needed the mayor's permission. And when 3 people, namely Putin, Sobchak, and I think Chusovsky was the last name, the head of the KGB of the Leningrad region, became co-owners of the Lomonosov airport portal, it became clear that, well, of course, Anatoly Alexandrovich was directly involved in this. Well, and then when I was told that if you want to open a casino in St. Petersburg, you have to bring between $50,000 and $100,000 in cash to Putin. And then Sobchak carries this money with $100 bills to a French bank to the branch in St. Petersburg. So in general, well, it became unpleasant, let's say. Yes, and that's when I stopped dealing with St. Petersburg. Although, as they say, it was at my mother-in-law's house where they decided how to rename Leningrad. Leningrad into what? So everyone voted for Petersburg except me. I voted for Petrograd because it seemed to me that it's better to call it in Russian, to ask to say it in Russian. No, so I didn't want Petrograd because that's Lenin, let's say communist, but I wanted Petersburg. Well, okay.
Leon, there's this video, I'm sure you've seen it. The one where they're at a barbecue, Sobchak with his wife, Putin with his wife, and some of their hangers-on. And I've watched it many times. Then they play table tennis there. I've watched it many times and was amazed. I was struck by the vibe of that video. They were absolutely, it felt like it was some kind of gangster gathering. It wasn't even about them wearing tracksuits, which matched the spirit of that time, some fake Adidas or something, but about the way they behaved. Sobchak was sitting sprawled out in the main chair like some kind of crime boss, giving them instructions, speaking condescendingly through his teeth. Putin answered him in about the same tone. They were talking to each other, but it felt like it was some kind of thieves' den. And when you said that Babkov, he managed to, so to speak, blend officials into the band at Petersburg, I think he succeeded. Because it was, I repeat, more like a gangster gathering than, for example, a barbecue of university professors. So, in your opinion, visually, how did they behave? What did they do in the evenings? How often? Well, because at Prigozhin's restaurants, as I understand it, they started meeting a bit later when he was already heading the FSB, or were they already living that nightlife back then?
Well, you know what you're telling about this gathering. Yes, Sobchak was acting all the time. He was acting in the movie. Well, we watched Sobchak, his movie. He was what you would call a son. If you don't know that expression, it means he's a real fanatic. And I remember we're sitting in a restaurant in Los Angeles. I even remember the restaurant. And I remember where, and suddenly he grabs my hand and says, "At the second table on the left, that's Gregory Peck." I say, "Gregory Peck, really?" "He lives nearby, Gregory Peck. Introduce me to him." I say, "I'm not acquainted with him. Introduce me to him." I get up, walk over to that table and say, "Please, for God's sake, the mayor of Leningrad, who for..." Well, that's how it is, you know. If it were someone else, they would have sent me away, but yes, well, how interesting. So I stood up, they met, and there was Gregory Peck. Or there, Lyuda was telling, well, you know, what's her name? Lyudmila Narusova, right? She was telling that when, well, who was it? Romy Schneider, I don't remember who, kissed Sobchak. He was like, "Don't touch me. Romy kissed me. Don't touch me. I'm going to meet her. And you, Lyuda. Lyuda, don't go there. I want to meet her alone." How funny. So, no, he wasn't in the mafia or anything like that. He just played the mafia. Unfortunately, he wasn't even the first in that team. That is, when he actually brought Putin into Sobchak's orbit, it was a KGB operation. They did it through that guy from 600 Seconds. What's his name? Sasha Nevzorov? Yes. The operation was carried out through Nevzorov, during which Shutov was smeared. Supposedly he was passing something. And Nevzorov and Shutov grew up in the same neighborhood. They were close friends and so on. And, so to speak, Nevzorov sold him out. Maybe he always sold him out. I don't know. And sort of, so to speak, information that only Shutov had suddenly started appearing with Nevzorov. Sobchak, so to speak, roared, kicked him out. So, well, then some personal information started to appear, kicked Shutov out. That's what Shutov told me. Then, between prisons, he was in prison, he got out of prison. Well, he apologized, found me, apologized for that first book. He hasn't written about the second one yet. Well, and that's also all sorts of issues. And so he started looking for someone else. And then this nice, modest, good person appeared, the head of the university's first department. Well, basically a crooked KGB bastard and so on. But nevertheless, they put him in. Just like there are good ones, like once the son of, oh my God, well, the singer, Kobzon's son once said when they told him, "You're the mafia," he said, "Yes, there is good mafia and there is bad mafia, and we're the good ones." Basically, that's what he did. He found a good KGB officer and made him his assistant. He wasn't the leader for very long. I mean, Putin was running around nearby, carrying his briefcase, breathing, sticking out his tongue, basically showing, as soon as he was made deputy and got his hands on the money, the flow of money, everything changed. He became the one in charge.
But Yuri Boldyrev also wrote some of his own memoirs back in the day. He said that he tried to persuade him when he ran in the elections, he came in third. Boldarev from St. Petersburg tried to persuade him to give his votes to Sobchak. And he said, he'll be traveling abroad and you and I will be in charge, will be in power and making money, as you say.
Cash money, yeah. I completely agree, and I didn't know about this episode, but he agrees too, with the fact that Sobchak simply wasn't capable, wasn't prepared at all for any kind of command, and he didn't have... Sometimes an ideologist arrives with a team, but in this case, there wasn't even a team. Where would a professor get one?
But about the team, I wanted to ask. After all, as I understand it, he later took these people with him. Putin, Chubais is a person from that time, from St. Petersburg. Medvedev was also a lawyer for Sobchak. I don't know, there are probably more. Gref worked with them at that time. I mean, a lot of people worked with them back then. Do you remember any of them from that time, Medvedev in particular, or not?
No, not Medvedev, but with Chubais, of course, we crossed paths, communicated, and I knew him well, yes.
And what kind of impression did Chubais make on you back then, you know?
A very good one. I even thought to myself, look at that. While I was away, and I was away from 73 to 89, a new generation has grown up. Let's say his parents know my parents. Yes, Chubais was there, so it was kind of the same social circle, and I didn't know him personally until that age. But I thought, after all, they grow up among ordinary intellectuals, well-mannered and educated, and smart, and, well, just give us a chance to grow and see how we grow. Well, that's how it is, and the only thing is, he quite rightly decided that either he would make the whole nation, so to speak, happy, or he would make himself and his friends very rich. And naturally, he chose the second option, just like 99.9% of people on Earth do. The only person I know who chose differently was the president, well, PU. With China, what's it called? Isn't that what they call him? What's the name of the island? Or rather, the city?
Singapore?
Singapore, of course. Something's wrong with my memory today. It happens. Singapore. There it is, I just said it out loud. When he was once asked how he managed to do it, he said, well, I just quoted him. He said, I had a choice. Either make a dozen of my friends fabulously rich or make life good on the island. And I decided that I would choose to make life good on the island, to make life good in the city on the island. And here, naturally, a person, naturally, once again, because 99 out of 100 choose this. They choose to make things good for themselves and their friends.
Well, exactly. What do you think? If we return to the present day, yes. Why did Chubais not say a word about the war for 4.5 years? Didn't say anything at all, even though he was deprived of everything. As I understand it, Russia is now holding a trial in absentia. That's it.
Why him? I haven't talked to any of them for many years. After I talked to them, they went through the crucible of Moscow, the crucible of power, the crucible of crazy money. So to speak, very few people can withstand that, right? But it's quite possible that he believes there is life after Putin, and that's why he's trying to secure that life for himself or for someone else, maybe his children. I don't know, maybe he has children.
He has children from his first marriage.
It doesn't matter. You can love children from a first marriage. It's rare, but it happens.
What difference does it make which marriage they're from? They're still children. Leon, look, there are still a lot of testimonies that are basically buried now. Yes, no one remembers them at the moment. There was a former investigator for especially important cases, Andrei Zikov, that's his name. He talked about how things happened there. He said that there was a construction corporation in St. Petersburg called the 20th Trust. It was privatized in the 1990s and was private, not state-owned. However, 80% of the state funds allocated for the city went directly to this organization. And transfers of budget funds to its account were happening constantly over many months. And then, in 1993, $5.5 million were transferred to the corporation's accounts. At that time, it was a huge amount of money, really huge. It's not like today's millions. That's right. And in 1999, a case was already opened based on this fact, which was called the Putin case. The case, so to speak, number 144,128. At that time, Putin was Sobchak's deputy. That's right, but this case was actually closed right away because they started pressuring the investigators and threatening them. They really started threatening the investigators. And what's interesting is, where did that money go? I mean, even back then, Putin was already a fighter, a go-getter. The criminal case was opened in June 1999. That's right. The Prosecutor General's office closed it on August 31, 2000. Putin wasn't president yet, and the money was coming from the 20th Trust. There's a place in Spain called Alicante Torrevieja, yes, and the 20th Trust Corporation was building a small cottage community of about 30 houses there. And among those houses, there was a house being built for Sobchak and a house for Putin. So even back then, remember, they used to say, oh my God, he wanted to drive a taxi. He was very poor when he came to work for Sobchak. He started making money pretty quickly after he was fired from the KGB. I think he was only formally fired. And he became a millionaire pretty quickly. You see, by 1999, he already had a house in Spain. So
either it's not written in the article you read, or you just didn't mention it. But it was Yeltsin who pulled Putin out of this situation.
Uh-huh.
First, Sobchak rushed to him, and then a bunch of other people followed, asking him to help, hinting that if Putin went down, so to speak, then a lot of other people would go down too. And then an order came from above not to touch him. So, after that, the senior investigator, not the one who was handling the case, but the one who assigned it, died in a sauna. That's what was written, but in reality, they beat him in the sauna and set it on fire. And he, so to speak, died, burned, passed away in that very sauna simply because he refused to close the case when he was told to. And he even appointed the boldest investigator he could find. Yes, a lot of money was going there, but already by that time, I think by the late 90s, the Lomonosov port was already operating, through which, I won't say tens or hundreds of millions, but I think it was hundreds of millions of money were being moved. Drugs were being moved there, calmly sorted and sent on, so to speak, let's say they were. Part of it came from Afghanistan, was sorted and sent to Europe under the protection of the Russian Coast Guard. I remember once there was a ship, I think it was a French ship, hired by Interpol, that was following the trail of a ship that was carrying drugs. And this wasn't marijuana, it was something much more serious. I don't remember exactly what they had on board. There were tens of millions of dollars there. They reported it to Leningrad, or rather Petersburg, since it wasn't Leningrad anymore. That this is the situation, we're keeping an eye on it. They said, yes, okay. As soon as the ship entered the area under the control of the Russian Coast Guard, boats approached it and took it somewhere. The ship that was behind, the French Interpol one, Interpol's, was stopped and allowed to enter. And then 2 days later they said, yes, here it is, there's nothing there, and by then there really was nothing left. That is, well, they unloaded everything and, so to speak, took it somewhere else.
So both Putin and Sobchak were involved in this. That is, both Putin and Sobchak were actually involved in drug trafficking. As I understand it, this wasn't the first time.
You know, let's put it this way. The fact that Putin knew about it and was doing it, well, you're the boss, you're in charge, and so on. I strongly suspect that Sobchak had a share in it. And again, what I'm about to say is indirect evidence, not definite proof. But once a week, Sobchak would take his famous briefcase, the brown one, so to speak. I had exactly the same one. We used to laugh about it. We had identical briefcases. He would take that briefcase and go to the French branch of the bank. Well, the St. Petersburg branch of the French bank. There's no point in naming it since it's gone. Everything comes from that bank's reports, which I personally read and reviewed. And he would bring exactly $1 million, $100 per bill. On the 17th time, the frightened person who was receiving it said, "Could you find some other way to transfer money across the border? I can't do this anymore." Well, of course he was afraid that his own people would catch him, that they'd grab him by the throat. And where did this money come from? But at the very least, according to his story, 17 times, $1 million each time was brought in once a week, right? So I strongly suspect that Sobchak didn't want to know where all of this was coming from. Personally, I would have acted the same way in his place. Let's put it that way.
Well, yes, he was such a prig and kind of had his head in the clouds. He didn't care about money, didn't eat well, that's clear. But as for everything else, I think everyone else was dirty, yes, in their work.
He loved money.
However, he always got him out of trouble. That famous case with Aliyev, which is always mentioned when people talk about Putin, actually shows that back then Sobchak got him out of trouble. He also, as I understand it, turned to Avon, and Avon retroactively allowed him, in short, signed it for him. These permits for, what is it called? Not tariffing, oh my God, well, in short, a permit for trading, yes. And Putin avoided prison this way, but Aliyev ended up looking like a fool.
Well, and she was forced to flee and spent the rest of her life somewhere out there, in some hut, somewhere. I don't remember the exact details. Almost in some village, yes, for the last 2 years there. That's all I have. I didn't take part in it, but some stories from some people have stayed in my memory. Well, yes, there were all the documents, everything that showed it was for 20 years because of the laws back then. Well, a few times, what you might call it, Putin was saved either by his superiors or once by his friends. Well, his KGB buddies saved him, and that's it. Yeah. And in the end, he made it exactly where he needed to be, so to speak.
Well, I also read some memoirs by Nikolai Andrushchenko, who was an official in the Leningrad City Council at the time. He says that Putin's reception area was always a mess and an open house. And he said that Putin was very hardworking and met with everyone. And he says, I personally saw both Mirilashvili and Kumarin in his office. For the viewers, I'll say, they probably don't remember, of course, Kumarin was basically a mob boss. And he even kept a photo where Putin and Kumarin are together, smiling, both shirtless. Yes.
Well, Kumarin, I remember Kumarin from the Leningrad Soviet, yes, I remember Kumarin. I didn't really know who he was. They showed me this. How did they tell me? Night director of either the port or Leningrad. Well, like, night director of the port, I think that's what they called him. I don't know, so to speak. Well, I wasn't really concerned about that.
What's interesting is that Putin was photographed with Kumarin. Both of them were shirtless there at that cooperative. They were already building it back then, the so-called O0 cooperative. And I noticed that he always had some kind of fixation. He likes to socialize with men and take pictures there, either shirtless or even completely undressed. That's it. No, seriously, you've seen him with his wife several times. So what was their relationship like? Do you remember that? Just visually.
No, I don't remember at all. I don't remember at all. I mean, I'm not even sure I knew which woman was his. I just don't remember.
Which woman was his wife? And what kind of relationships did Sobchak have in Russia? Well,
in terms of language? Well, yes.
Well, you remember Sobchak,
she was, so to speak, like that. He respected her opinion. That is, he was interested in her opinion because she was street smart, she was sharp. I think she is not a stupid person at all. I think so to speak. Yes, they became friends with my wife there and went shopping together. I remember. My wife said, back then nobody really had much money. They came there when they first arrived here. He was already the mayor there, so he was the mayor. They flew business class, and we arranged that nice hotel for them, but... So, nobody had money to buy gifts, and they needed to buy gifts. My wife says, listen, there's this store. It's called the 99-cent store. You can buy a bunch of things there that girls like. There are all sorts of things like fancy stockings and so on. And then Lyuda says, let's do it. Well, so the city provided, Los Angeles provided a limousine, 100 meters long. And so the limousine had little flags. It drives right up to the main central 99-cent store. The driver says, are you sure you want me to drop you off here? Stop here? Yes, right here. So can I wait for you for the change? So, and then he went to get the change. And they go there and come out. They have bags in their hands. A lot. Huge 99-cent bags. Everyone recognizes them. Everyone. So, the driver jumped out, opened it, so. This one, in the back. What's it called? Well, where you put the luggage, the driver put the luggage there. And when they arrived at the hotel, he said, "Excuse me, may I rearrange something?" And so he put all those packages into some bags, closed everything up, and said, "You don't need to hand over the bags, but don't show anyone at the entrance of your hotel, which costs at least $1,500 a night. At the very least, don't show anyone what you're carrying." So, that's how it was. They were so funny. Sobchak is here every day. He watched all this, where they stayed for a week. And he said, "Well, Gulya, this is my wife. How much money did you save me today? Come on, show me." Me. And so they would look through all these purchases.
I think they weren't the ones paying for the hotel. It was paid for by the Lenin Soviet, as you say. That's actually why it was such an expensive hotel, even though they didn't really want to spend much on gifts. We don't have much time left. I want to talk to you a bit more, Leon, to have time to discuss it. I know that you are following the current situation in the United States and in Iran. This agreement with Iran, which might be signed tomorrow or the day after, I think that, but for now we don't know its contents. Trump was at the G7 there. I know he talked with Zelensky and so on, but he said that when the agreement is signed, he will focus on Ukraine. But CIA Director Ratcliffe told President Trump that the intelligence gathered and the evidence make it doubtful that Iran is ready to make nuclear concessions. So, as I understand it, there won't be any reduction of the nuclear program, so to speak. As for the Strait of Hormuz, it seems to be open, but it's hard to understand. Some say it's open, others say it's closed. There's conflicting information. How would you assess, let's say, Trump's current campaign against Iran? Well, because it's unclear whether it will continue or not?
Yes. Well, look, as for the facts, I really don't like speculating because most people I know and listen to have no idea what's going on, but everyone pretends to know. And some don't even pretend to be smart. Well, who got lucky?
I can't find that look there. Yes.
Well, for me, yes. We're lucky, you and I. We look smart and good looking. Not everyone is that fortunate, right? So, well, jokes aside, what do we know? Iran was on the verge of creating an atomic bomb. They had 450 something kilograms or pounds, I can't remember right now, which would have been enough for 10 or 12 billion bombs. Why is this number important? Because Kuchma sold it to Iran through all these secret channels. We know this for sure. 12 missiles with a range of 3,000 kilometers, which were prepared for AAA.
How do we know that Kuchma sold 12 missiles?
Well, there's a ton of information. I can send it to you. There's just a lot of information about this. 6 directly to Iran, 6 to China through Chinese suppliers. And again, it's known that they ended up in Iran. So, as of today, it's public information. 12 missiles? I don't know if they're called ballistic or not. I don't know. But they have a range of 3,000 kilometers. They've been transferred to Iran, and they can be fitted with nuclear warheads. Accordingly, yes, and a number of scientists from Ukraine were sent as well. And this is, so to speak, semi-official information, so I'm saying right away, DCTA, NATO first.
During Kuchma's time, he sent, yes.
Yes, during Kuchma's time. He sent them there, so to speak, in order to teach them how to basically dress up or do something else like that. That is, they handed over the missiles, all of them definitely aimed at Israel, at nothing else, because they kept saying every day that if we had nuclear weapons, we would wipe out Israel.
Before the war, 600 people were assigned to Atom, as far as I know. Before the war, right? Before the war, there were about 600 people there whom Erosatom took when Trump started bombing Israel. So that's why it's certain that Russian nuclear specialists worked there, especially in the last year. And there were quite a few of them.
Well, yes. In Russia, they kept working all these years, yes. So we know, well, besides the fact that Ukraine was constantly voting against Israel and so on, and that's it, so to speak, basically refused together with Russia, together with Iran, in the camp against Israel. Yes, so to speak, from Israel's point of view, anti-Semitic behavior. So, because anti-Israeli means anti-Semitic, and even the Druze are simply Jews who live in the Middle East. For example, I lived there. Now I live here. Maybe I'll go back to live there. So I'm a Jew who can be both bad and good. A good Jew is one who doesn't live in Israel, and a Zionist is a bad Jew. Well, all right. So, those 12 bombs were almost ready. A bit more and they would have ended up in those missiles. And from that moment, from our point of view, the American one, what is called blackmail could have started. Therefore, from our point of view, we were forced, although we really didn't want to do it, to fly there and start bombing something. We thought that we had bombed it, but it turned out that in January we hadn't bombed it. Now, the thing is, well, we bombed 3 targets there, but it turned out that first of all, we didn't hit everything we needed to, and secondly, they restored it quite easily. Now, in other places. Now, the task of Iran, we knew perfectly well that Iran has these underground facilities, 300 to 500 meters under basalt rocks, and that we wouldn't be able to reach them. We knew there were missiles there, we knew there was electricity, water, food, and so on. And we knew, as they said many times, that the moment we start fighting them, they will block the Hormuz. So we had a minimum task which was mandatory and a maximum task which was more of a wish. Before the minimum task, I'm answering now, and I'm starting to answer your question. Sorry for such a long introduction. That's just how I get into it. We have a long one, but they're still saying my name until the end. Well, okay, so our minimum task was the following. To deprive Iran of the ability to do anything in the next 5 to 10 years militarily, both in terms of nuclear and conventional capabilities, and during these 5 to 10 years to form a coalition through the Abraham Accords. And, so to speak, to create opportunities, maybe a canal or lay a pipeline or something else, and completely deprive Iran of the weapon called Hormuz. What did we do? We set them back by at least 5 and possibly 10 years, and during these 5 years we will now be able to do many things that we couldn't do before, because Iran incited the Arabs living near Israel in Gaza to start a massacre. This was done so that Israel wouldn't sign agreements with Saudi Arabia. Now we will be resigning these agreements, and during these 5 years that we set Iran back, we will return the situation to what we wanted. Namely, Iran will no longer have the power it used to have. The maximum goal was just a wish. Not necessary, but it was something we wanted. What if their government collapsed? It didn't, but whatever. We achieved the most important thing. Well,
let's see what Trump will sign tomorrow or the day after. And then, of course, the results of this war will finally become clear. Leon, thank you so much. Really, it's always wonderful and interesting with you. I think we will continue these conversations with you because the situation in the Persian Gulf is extremely interesting. I would discuss it with you just like the situation in Israel, so thank you very much. But that's a separate big conversation. See you next time. See you. Let's wrap up.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.